The pantry door was left ajar, just enough for a cold, white sliver of light to creep in from the hallway. Inside, it smelled of dried spices, freshly ground coffee, and that peculiar silence found in overly large houses when everyone is asleep. There, seated on the floor, her back pressed against the cabinet, as if she wished to vanish into the wood, was Lily Adams, the housekeeper. She wore her maroon uniform with a white apron, her hair neatly tucked under a simple cap, and her eyes downcast, sunken in a sadness that needed no words. In her trembling hands, she held a plate with leftover roast chicken and potatoes, scraps someone had left on a silver tray hours earlier. With a fork, she separated the grains of rice as if counting coins. She ate slowly, not out of delicacy, but fear. Fear that the sound would betray her. Fear that this small relief would end too soon. At the end of the hallway, several paces away, Thomas Harrison, a millionaire in a dark suit, had stopped as if the polished stone floor of his own home had struck him on the back of the neck. Thomas was not a man accustomed to standing still. In London, his surname was pronounced with respect and caution. Owner of businesses, investor, frequent guest at events where paparazzi flashes blinded you and smiles meant nothing. But at that moment, with his hands clasped in front of him and his jaw clenched, Thomas seemed a stranger within his grand estate. He had come down to the staff quarters, seeking a glass of water, as insomnia had him dragging his feet. And what he found was this impossible scene, a woman hidden, eating what wasn't meant for her, with the gesture of someone apologizing for existing. Lily felt the presence before she saw him. Some gazes simply weigh you down. She raised her head just a couple of centimeters, enough for the moist glint in her eyes to meet the man's shadow. She froze, the fork suspended in midair, her throat closing up. "Mr. Harrison," she whispered, and in that word, all the dignity she still tried to maintain slipped away. Thomas didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched like a taut rope, and the only music was the refrigerator's distant, emotionless hum. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked, his voice softer than he would have allowed himself in a boardroom meeting. Lily swallowed hard, looking at the plate as if the food could explain what she dared not say. Then she gripped the edge of the porcelain with her fingers as if it were a lifesaver. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother, I just—" Her lips trembled. "I was just hungry." The word hungry hung in the air, ugly, uncomfortable, like a stain on an expensive carpet. Thomas heard it as if it were an accusation, not against him, at least not out loud, but his house, his system, his perfect order. Everything suddenly sounded like a lie. Lily lowered her gaze, expecting the usual blow. A reprimand, a threat, a look of contempt. "Gather your things and leave." She had lived it before in other houses, in other cities. She had worked in Bristol, in Leeds, in Manchester. Always the same. Enormous doors, invisible rules, and people who never looked you in the eye. Instinctively, she gripped the fork tightly, as if they might snatch it away. Thomas took a step, then another. The hallway light silhouetted him against the shelves, filled with spice jars and bottles aligned by size. When he was close, he could see that Lily wasn't eating desperately, but carefully, like someone trying to make a moment of peace last. He could also see the dark circles under her eyes, the dry skin on her knuckles, the frayed edge of her uniform sleeve, details never noticed when one lives upstairs, where problems are merely figures on screens. "Lily," he said, and pronouncing her name sounded strange, as if he had never said it aloud. "How long have you been doing this?" She swallowed again. Shame crept up her neck like a fever. "Not always, Mr. Harrison. Just these past few days," she confessed. "Sometimes it's not enough." Thomas frowned. Not because he disbelieved her, but because his brain, trained to close deals and foresee risks, didn't know where to place this reality. "Not enough," he repeated, as if it were a phrase in another language. "With what we pay you." Lily let out a faint, joyless laugh. It wasn't mockery, it was exhaustion. "With what I get paid here, I pay for my room, the bus, my mum's medicines, and what I can send to my children." Her eyes welled up. "And by the weekend, there's nothing left." Thomas felt a sharp pang in his chest. Her children. He knew nothing of that. He knew Lily was punctual, quiet, efficient. He knew no one complained about her. He knew the house sparkled, but he didn't know there was a life behind the uniform. Lily's hand trembled, and the fork clinked softly against the plate, a sound too loud for what she intended. That sound seemed to rouse the millionaire from his paralysis. "I'm not going to fire you for this," Thomas said, almost defensively, as if anticipating the fear in her face. "No one should have to hide to eat." Lily looked up quickly, incredulously. Her eyes searched for a trap. The wealthy, in her experience, gave nothing without exacting a price. Thomas leaned forward slightly, without fully bending, as if the distance between them was an abyss he didn't know how to cross. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. Lily pressed her lips together. "Because, who does one tell?" she replied with raw honesty. "Here, you're invisible, and when you speak, you're a bother." That sentence struck Thomas with more force than any newspaper headline. Invisible. The entire house was full of people he didn't see, people who made his life function, people who were hungry. Thomas straightened up, looked around. Perfect shelves, wicker baskets, labeled jars, a pantry that looked like a catalog, and yet, a woman sitting on the floor eating leftovers as if committing a crime. Somewhere down the hallway, a clock subtly chimed the hour. Thomas felt, for the first time in years, that time didn't belong to him. "Come," he said suddenly, his tone neither an order nor a reprimand, but something clumsier, an urgency. Lily tensed. "Mr. Harrison, I'll finish up." And, "No, please, come," Thomas insisted. And that word, please, came out strange and heavy. She hesitated. Then, carefully, she put the plate aside, wiped her lips with the back of her hand, and stood up. Her knees creaked slightly. Thomas noticed that detail too, accumulated physical exhaustion. They walked down the hallway in silence. The millionaire walked ahead, but not with his usual arrogant confidence. He walked like someone entering a dark room, searching for something long lost. They reached the main kitchen, enormous, modern, with gleaming surfaces that reflected the light. Thomas opened the refrigerator as if it were a confession, took out a container of food, bread, fruit. Then he looked at Lily. "If you're going to eat, you'll eat here," he said, sitting in a chair, with a glass of water, without hiding. Lily blinked, swallowing a lump in her throat. She didn't know whether to thank him or cry. The kitchen, to her, was alien territory, even though she worked in it. It was the heart of the house, but never the heart of her life. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she whispered. Thomas stared at his hands, as if he suddenly didn't know what to do with them. "My name is Thomas," he corrected, without harshness. "When no one else is around, you can call me Thomas." Lily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She nodded. She sat down slowly, as if the chair were fragile, or as if she didn't deserve to occupy it. Thomas poured her water. He watched as Lily drank carefully, and the simple act of drinking in someone's sight, without fear, seemed to cost her more than cleaning the entire house. And right there, at that second, where the kitchen became a stage of truth, Thomas felt something within him crack. It wasn't a great blow, it was a silent fissure, the same kind of crack that begins in a perfect wall and, with time, ends up revealing what lies beneath. Because Thomas didn't just see the housekeeper eating leftovers, he saw a woman carrying a world. He saw a system he owned and was complicit in. And without yet understanding how, he knew that image would never let him sleep again. And before we continue, let me tell you something. If this scene tightened your chest, if you felt the injustice, and also that hope that something would change, then this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel right now, because twists are coming that will leave you speechless. And here we tell stories that not only entertain, but also awaken the heart. And I ask you a question. From what city are you listening to this story? Leave it in the comments. I want to read you because perhaps somewhere someone feels as invisible as Lily felt that night. Thomas leaned against the counter, watching Lily eat again, no longer hidden, but still with her back hunched. She brought a mouthful to her lips, and her eyes moistened. She didn't cry. She resisted. People like Lily learn to swallow tears as they learn to wash dishes quickly, without making noise. "What are your children's names?" Thomas asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice held a new tension. Lily chewed slowly before responding. "Scarlett and Max," she said. "Scarlett is 8. Max is 5. Thomas repeated the names internally as if they were a password. "Do they live with you here in London?" She shook her head. "No, they're with my mum in Coventry. I send what I can, and when I save enough, I go to see them." But she bit her lip. "It's been 3 months since I last hugged them." Thomas felt that sentence like a blunt blow. He thought of his own children upstairs, asleep in enormous rooms, with untouched toys, with nannies to care for them. He thought of how he sometimes gave them a distracted kiss before heading out to a meeting. He thought of how easy it was for him to say tomorrow and keep that promise. For Lily, tomorrow was an expensive promise. "And your mum?" he asked almost unconsciously. "She has lung problems," Lily replied. "She needs inhalers. And sometimes, the doctor, I do what I can. Thomas lowered his gaze. I do what I can. He said that too, but in his world, it meant choosing between two investments. In Lily's world, it meant choosing between eating or buying medicine. A strange silence fell, not uncomfortable, but heavy, as if the entire house were listening. Thomas walked towards the kitchen window, looked at the perfect garden illuminated by soft lights, and felt shame. Not the superficial shame of what will people say, but a more dangerous shame, one that forces you to see your entire life and ask yourself when you became so insensitive. Lily began, but couldn't find the end of the sentence. She looked at him, alert, accustomed to any kind gesture coming with a condition. Thomas took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I want you to accompany me to the administration office, he said. We're going to review your salary and your hours and whatever you need so you don't have to go through this again. Lily remained motionless. Fear returned suddenly, but mixed with something that burned in her eyes. Hope, Mr. Harrison, I don't want any trouble, she said quickly. If I did something wrong, tell me, and I'll... You didn't do anything wrong, Thomas interrupted firmly. I was the one doing something wrong, without knowing it. Those simple words made Lily gasp, as if she had been underwater. Thomas forced himself to look her directly. I thought paying you was enough, he continued. I thought my responsibility ended with the check, but you, he gestured towards the hallway they had come from. You were eating hidden in my house, in a house where there's more than enough food. That makes no sense. Lily lowered her gaze again, because when someone powerful admits guilt, people like her don't know how to stand without trembling. Sometimes you get used to it, Lily murmured. To the shame, I mean. Thomas closed his eyes for a second. The word used to give him shivers because he too had become accustomed to not seeing. At that moment, a soft sound came from upstairs, like a small whimper, a child. Thomas's eyes snapped open. Did you hear that? He asked. Lily nodded. It must be little Chloe, she said, and her voice changed tone naturally. Soft, maternal. Sometimes she wakes up with nightmares. Thomas tensed. Chloe was his youngest daughter, aged 6. Since the death of his wife a year ago, Chloe had bad nights, and Thomas had sought refuge in work, in figures, in the idea that pain could be fixed with control. But pain doesn't understand control. The nanny is with her, Thomas said as if trying to convince himself. Lily hesitated. The nanny left early today because her son was unwell. I stayed on alert in case anything happened. Thomas felt another pang. Lily, hungry, exhausted, with her world on her shoulders, and still looking after his daughter. Why? He asked. And it wasn't a question from a boss. It was a question from a broken man. Why did you stay? Lily looked at the almost empty plate. Because children aren't to blame for anything, she replied. And because since your wife passed, the little girl clearly needs a hug. Thomas gripped the counter. The truth cut him like a knife. His daughter needed a hug, and he wasn't there. Thomas walked towards the stairs, but before ascending, he turned. When you're finished, come upstairs, he told Lily. I want you to show me Chloe's room and how you calm her when she wakes up. Lily's eyes widened in surprise. It wasn't common for the millionaire to ask to learn something that wasn't his concern. All right, she whispered. Thomas ascended slowly, each step sounding like a judgment. As he reached the bedroom hallway, he heard Chloe's voice, broken, calling for him. Daddy. The voice was small, fragile. Daddy, are you there? Thomas stopped in front of the door. For a second, he was afraid to enter. Afraid of not knowing what to say. Afraid of discovering that love could also be lost through absence. He entered. Chloe was sitting in bed, clutching a teddy bear. Her eyes were red. Seeing him, she extended a trembling hand. I dreamt Mummy left again, she said. Thomas swallowed, approached, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in weeks, hugged his daughter with intention, not in a hurry. I'm not leaving, he promised, though he didn't know if he could keep it. Chloe clung to his neck. I heard you downstairs, she murmured. Who were you talking to? Thomas felt his heart constrict. With Lily, he replied. She works here, and she helped me understand something important. Chloe pulled back slightly and looked at him. Lily is good, the girl said with absolute certainty. When I cry, she sings to me softly. Thomas closed his eyes for an instant. How was it possible that his daughter knew Lily's kindness more than he did? About half an hour later, Lily came upstairs with timid steps. She stood in the doorway as if the bedroom hallway was not her territory. Thomas saw her from Chloe's room. Come in, he said. Lily entered slowly. Chloe looked at her, and her face lit up. "Lily," she whispered, and extended her arms. Lily hesitated, looking at Thomas for permission. Thomas nodded. Then Lily approached and hugged the girl with a tenderness that filled the air. Chloe rested her head on her shoulder, and Lily stroked her hair as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Would you like me to sing?" Lily asked. Chloe nodded. Lily began to sing a soft lullaby in a low voice. Thomas watched from the corner, feeling something in his chest loosen, like a tie finally undone after years. When the child calmed down, Thomas spoke in a low voice so as not to break the moment. "Lily," he said, "I didn't know any of this." She didn't stop stroking Chloe's hair. "You've had a lot on your plate, Mr. Thomas," she replied, not accusingly, just stating a truth. "The house gets used to functioning, even when someone is missing, but children don't get used to it the same way." Thomas felt the lesson like a wave. In his world, everything could be replaced. A manager, a supplier, a car, a plan, but a mother's hug could not. When Chloe fell asleep, Lily rose carefully, as if sleep were a fragile thing. Thomas accompanied her to the hallway. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time, that word sounded as it should, like a debt. Lily lowered her gaze. "I'm just doing my job." Thomas shook his head. "You're doing more than that." "And his voice barely broke, "I've been living as if the people here were just part of the furniture." Lily didn't respond. Because sometimes, when someone powerful begins to see, it's best to let silence finish the work. Thomas watched her walk away down the service corridor, and then, just as she was about to turn the corner, Thomas saw something he hadn't seen before. A simple thread bracelet on her worn wrist with two tiny initials, S and M, Scarlett and Max. Thomas stood still. That bracelet was a reminder of a life Lily carried even when cleaning other people's bathrooms. A reminder that she wasn't just the housekeeper, she was a mother. That night, Thomas didn't return to his room. He stayed in his study, looking at documents that no longer meant anything. He opened his laptop, reviewed numbers, contracts, and budgets. But the image of Lily eating leftovers on the floor burned in his mind like a still photograph. However, what destroyed him most wasn't Lily's hunger. It was his own blindness. It was realizing that he had built an empire, and yet had failed in the most basic thing, humanity. Near dawn, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. It was Lily, ready to start the day, as if nothing had happened, as if shame hadn't trembled in her throat just hours before. Thomas came out and stopped her with a gesture. "Lily," he said. She stopped. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas." Thomas took a deep breath. "Today, we're going to fix this," he said. "Not just your salary, not just the food, everything." Lily frowned, confused. "Everything what?" Thomas looked around. The house, the staff, the hallways that seemed like labyrinths. "My life," he replied with an honesty that startled even him. "Because last night I realized I have everything, but I'm empty. And you, with less than you deserve, can still look after my children better than I can." Lily opened her mouth, but said nothing. Sometimes the truth leaves one speechless. Thomas took a step closer. "I want to help you bring your children to London." He blurted it out, as if he didn't say it now, he would lose his nerve. "I want you to have a decent place and never go hungry again." Lily froze, her eyes filled with fear and suspicion. "Because grand promises often bring pain." "Why?" she asked in a whisper. "What do you want in return?" Thomas felt a blow to his stomach, that she would think that was logical. It was life teaching her to mistrust. "Nothing," he said, and his voice was firm. "I want nothing in return. I just want to do the right thing." Lily clenched her jaw. "The right thing," she repeated, tasting the word. "The right thing rarely happens for people like me." Thomas looked at her with honest pain. "Then we'll make it happen," he replied. "Even if it's late." Lily swallowed, and in her eyes appeared that dangerous mix of hope and terror. The hope that something would finally change, and the terror that it would be a lie. And so, in the hallway of a London mansion, with the morning beginning to illuminate the jars in the pantry, Thomas Harrison felt that fate was collecting a debt he didn't know he owed. Because what he saw that night, a woman hiding to eat leftovers, wasn't just a sad scene, it was a mirror, and the reflection could not be ignored. But Thomas didn't yet know the worst, nor what that truth would awaken. Because Lily's story wasn't just about hunger, it was a buried secret. A secret that, when it came to light, would shake that house to its foundations and change the millionaire's life forever. The morning at the Harrison estate dawned differently, though nothing seemed to have changed at first glance. The sun streamed through the wide windows of the main dining room, illuminating the long, polished wooden table, where each plate was set with mathematical precision. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with that of toast and fresh orange juice. Everything seemed perfect, as always. But inside, Thomas Harrison, something no longer fit. He stood at the head of the table, his jacket still on despite the gentle London warmth. He hadn't slept more than an hour. The image of Lily, sitting on the pantry floor, eating leftovers as if it were a crime, replayed in his mind again and again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the trembling in her hands, the fear in her voice, as she said the word hungry. From the kitchen, Lily observed the dining room with learned routine. She served breakfast with precise, silent movements. No one would have imagined that hours earlier she had been hiding, praying not to be discovered. Her face was serene, but her eyes held a different depth, as if she too knew that something had shifted in the house's invisible balance. Chloe came down the stairs in her pink pajamas, her hair disheveled. "Morning, Daddy," she said, her voice still sleepy. Thomas looked at her differently that morning, not like the businessman checking schedules, but like a father who was just beginning to realize what he had been missing. "Morning, Princess," he replied, and this time his smile was genuine. Chloe looked around. Lily's awake. Thomas noticed the naturalness with which his daughter pronounced that name. It wasn't the housekeeper. It was Lily. "Yes," he replied. "She's in the kitchen." Chloe got down from her chair and ran towards the door. "Lily!" Lily appeared with a cloth in her hand, surprised by the enthusiasm. "Good morning, my dear," she greeted sweetly. Chloe hugged her without hesitation. That simple, spontaneous gesture tightened Thomas's chest, as if someone were showing him a scene he should have seen months ago. During breakfast, Thomas noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. He saw how Lily discreetly made sure Chloe ate well. He saw how she moved the glass closer to the girl before she even asked for it. He saw that silent connection built in spaces where pain needs comfort. When the children finished and went to the garden with their governess, Thomas asked Lily to stay. She tensed slightly. "Yes, Mr. Thomas. I want you to tell me the whole truth," he said, gesturing to a chair opposite the table. Lily hesitated, looked at the floor. Sitting there, opposite the owner of the house, was not customary. "It's not necessary for me to sit," she tried to say. "Yes, it is," he replied with quiet firmness. "If we're going to talk, we'll do it face to face." Lily obeyed cautiously. She sat on the edge of the chair as if ready to stand up at any moment. Thomas took a deep breath. "Last night you told me it wasn't enough," he began. "I want to know exactly how you're living." The question wasn't an accusation but an attempt at understanding. Still, Lily felt the old fear course down her spine. "I earn what was agreed, sir. I'm not complaining," she said, automatically. Thomas shook his head. "I don't want to hear the correct answer. I want to hear the truth." That nuance changed something. Lily looked up. For the first time, she didn't see the boss, but a confused man. "I pay for a room in a shared house in a less affluent part of South London," she began slowly. "It's small, shared. Sometimes the water goes, sometimes the electricity. I send money to my mum for her medication. Scarlett needs new school supplies. Max," her voice barely broke. "Max wants to join a local football club." Thomas listened without interrupting. "I thought I could save more," she continued. "But when prices go up, something is always missing. And when you send the little you have, you're left with less here." "How much do you have left each month for yourself?" Thomas asked. Lily hesitated, embarrassed. "Some weeks, nothing." The silence that followed was heavier than any reproach. Thomas leaned on the table, feeling that every word was an uncomfortable revelation. "How many times have you gone hungry here?" he asked. Lily lowered her gaze. "Enough times for no one to notice." That sentence hit hard. Thomas felt a mixture of anger and guilt. "Why didn't you talk to me?" She looked at him with brutal honesty. "Because people like you don't usually listen to that, and because when you need too much, you're a bother." Thomas clenched his fists. "That's going to change." Lily frowned. "Mr. Harrison, with respect, I've heard that before." Thomas looked at her steadily. "I've heard many promises in my life too, but this isn't a promise, it's a decision." He stood up and walked to the window. He looked at the immaculate garden, the precisely trimmed hedges, everything under control, except the essential. "Today we will adjust your salary," he continued. "But not just that. I want to review the conditions for all staff. No one here should have to hide to eat." Lily felt a lump in her throat. "That could cause problems, sir." "For whom?" he asked. She hesitated. "For you, for the company, for your image." Thomas let out a brief, bitter laugh. "My image is not worth more than the dignity of those who work with me." That sentence hung between them. But what Thomas didn't yet know was that the story wasn't limited to Lily's poverty. There was something deeper, something that explained her tired gaze, her way of hugging Chloe with such intensity. "What else aren't you telling me?" he asked suddenly. Lily felt her heart race. "Nothing." Thomas observed her closely. "Last night you mentioned your mum is ill, but when you sang to Chloe, it sounded like you were singing for someone else." Lily closed her eyes for a second. "I sing for my children all the same," she admitted. Thomas inclined his head. "Then tell me the whole truth." She took a deep breath. "My husband died 2 years ago," she finally said. "He worked in construction. He fell from scaffolding. There was no insurance, no compensation." Thomas felt a dull blow to his chest. "Since then," she continued, "I am everything to my children." The kitchen fell silent. The distant sound from the garden seemed detached. "And that's why you came to London?" he asked. Lily nodded. "In Coventry, I couldn't find stable work. Here, at least, I have this. This, a small word for such sacrifice." Thomas felt every layer of his comfortable life crumbling. The housekeeper he saw every day wasn't just a quiet worker. She was a woman who had lost her husband, who raised children remotely, who sent every penny as if it were gold. "You don't deserve to be hiding to eat," he said firmly. Lily looked at him, but this time there was no distrust in her eyes. There was exhaustion and a timid hope. "Mr. Thomas," she whispered, "I don't want charity. I'm not offering you charity," he replied. "I'm offering you justice." The word resonated in the air. At that instant, the main door opened forcefully. The abrupt sound interrupted the moment. It was Richard, Thomas's brother and partner in several businesses. He frowned, cellular phone in hand. "Thomas, we need to talk," he said urgently. "Now." Richard stopped when he saw Lily seated at the table. "What's she doing here?" he asked without disguising his annoyance. The atmosphere changed immediately. Lily instinctively stood up. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured. Thomas felt a spark of anger. "She's here because I asked her to sit," he replied coldly. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you mix staff matters with family?" Thomas took a step forward. "Since I understood that staff isn't an inferior category, Richard." Richard looked at him in disbelief. "What's going on?" Thomas took a deep breath. "What's going on is that last night I discovered something that shouldn't be happening in my own home." Richard crossed his arms. "And that would be?" Thomas looked at Lily, then at his brother. "That one of my housekeepers was eating leftovers in secret because her wages weren't enough." The silence was immediate. Richard let out a short laugh. "That's not your personal responsibility." Thomas looked at him sternly. "Of course it is." Richard shook his head. "If you start getting emotionally involved with every employee, you'll lose control." Thomas felt the old business logic clash with the new fissure that had opened within him. "Perhaps control isn't the most important thing," he said with dangerous calm. Richard looked at him, as if he didn't recognize the man in front of him. "Are you reacting to some sentimental scene?" Thomas took another step. "I'm not reacting because, for the first time, I saw reality." Richard was silent for a few seconds. "If you increase salaries without reviewing budgets, it will affect profitability." Thomas held his gaze. "Then we will review the budgets." Richard sighed. "You're getting involved in something unnecessary." Thomas shook his head. What was unnecessary was for her to go hungry here. Lily remained still, feeling her life being discussed as if it were just another project. Thomas turned to her. "Lily, you may withdraw for now." She nodded and left in silence, but with her heart pounding. When the door closed, Richard spoke in a low voice. "You can't let emotion drive your decisions, Thomas." Thomas looked at him with a new clarity. "Perhaps that's why I've been empty for so long." Richard didn't respond. And while the brothers discussed numbers and principles, Lily walked towards the staff quarters, her mind racing. She didn't know if what had begun that morning would be her salvation, or the start of something that could break everything. Because sometimes when someone powerful decides to change, it doesn't just transform their life, it also awakens resistance, secrets, hidden interests. And Lily still didn't know that her husband's death hadn't been a simple accident, and that buried truth, hidden for years, was about to come to light. And when that happened, it wouldn't just change her destiny, it would change Thomas's forever. The rest of the day at the Harrison estate was not normal. Nothing exploded. No one shouted. There were no dramatic scenes in front of the staff. But the air changed. It felt denser, like when a storm is brewing in London, and the clouds haven't yet unleashed, but the sky is already different. After the argument with Richard, Thomas locked himself in his study. He closed the door, something he rarely did. On the desk were contracts, folders with financial reports, growth charts, and quarterly projections. Everything that for years had defined his life. But now those papers seemed empty. He opened his laptop and began to review the payroll records of the domestic staff. Each name was a story he had never asked about. Lily Adams, Julia Perry, Ernest Saunders. Tenure, hours, wages. As he scrolled through the screen, he remembered Richard's words. If you start getting emotionally involved with every employee, you'll lose control. But what was control, really? A system that functioned without looking at the people who sustained it. Thomas closed his eyes for an instant and saw Lily again on the floor, with the plate of roast chicken and potatoes in her hand. No, that wasn't control, that was indifference. Meanwhile, in the staff quarters, Lily was sitting on the edge of her narrow bed. The small room had a window that overlooked the back of the house. From there, she could see the high wall separating the mansion from the rest of the world, a wall that had always seemed symbolic to her. She held her mobile phone in her hands. She looked at the screen without daring to call. Finally, she dialed her mother's number in Coventry. "Hello," a tired voice answered on the other end. "Mum, it's me." "Lily, darling, is everything all right?" Lily hesitated. "Yes, well, I don't know." Her mother fell silent. "Did something happen?" Lily took a deep breath. "Mister, Thomas saw me eating in the pantry last night." There was a tense silence. "Did he fire you?" her mother asked with fear. "No, that's the strange thing." Lily pressed the phone to her ear. "He says he wants to help, that he's going to increase my salary, that he wants me to bring the children here." On the other end, her mother sighed deeply. "Daughter, be careful." The word fell heavily. "Not all wealthy people help without expecting something in return," the woman continued. "You know that." Lily looked at the white wall in front of her. "Yes, I know." "What do you feel?" Lily closed her eyes. "I feel like it's different, but I also feel scared." Her mother didn't respond immediately. "Fear sometimes protects you," she finally said, "but it can also prevent you from seeing an opportunity." Lily remained silent. "I don't want my children to grow up away from me," she whispered. "But I also don't want them to depend on someone who might change their mind." "Then don't depend," her mother replied. "Accept help, but keep your dignity." Lily nodded, though her mother couldn't see her. After hanging up, she remained seated for a few more minutes, thinking of her husband, David, of the day she saw him leave for the construction site and never return. The construction site where David worked belonged to a subcontracted company. She remembered the name, though she hadn't pronounced it in a long time. Valleywood Construction plc. That name sent shivers down her spine. In the study, Thomas paused his review. He opened an old folder in the side filing cabinet, documents of past investments, property projects. He searched, without knowing exactly what, until he found it. A contract for a minority stake in a local construction company signed 3 years ago. Valleywood Construction plc. Thomas frowned. He didn't remember the project's details. It had been a small investment within a broad portfolio. His team handled the supervision. He rarely intervened directly, but the name unnerved him. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Clara, I need all the safety reports for Valleywood Construction plc from the last 5 years." "Of course, sir," she replied, surprised by the unexpected request. Thomas hung up and leaned back in his chair. A suspicion was beginning to take shape. Hours later, Richard returned to the study without knocking. "We have a meeting with investors in 2 hours," he announced. Thomas didn't look up. "Cancel it." Richard stood motionless. "Pardon me? Cancel it. Reschedule." "Thomas, you can't." Thomas looked up with a new firmness. "Yes, I can." Richard watched him with growing concern. "Are you acting impulsively?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "I'm acting consciously for the first time in a long time." Richard sighed. "Does this have to do with the housekeeper?" Thomas remained silent. That was answer enough. Richard ran a hand over his face. "You can't jeopardize the business for a sad story." Thomas stood up. "It's not a sad story, it's an injustice." Richard looked at him fixedly. "The world is full of injustices." Thomas took a step towards him. "But this one is under my roof." The words resonated in the study. Richard fell silent. Meanwhile, Lily helped Chloe with her homework in the playroom. The girl was drawing a house with crayons. "Where are Scarlett and Max?" she suddenly asked. Lily smiled tenderly. "In Coventry, my love." Chloe frowned. "Why don't they live with you?" The question was direct, innocent. Lily took a deep breath. "Because sometimes adults have to go far to work and provide better things for their children." Chloe became thoughtful. "That's not fair." Lily stroked her hair. Sometimes life takes a while to be fair. Chloe looked up. My daddy can fix it. Lily felt a lump in her throat. Your daddy can't fix everything. But deep down, a part of her began to wonder if maybe, this time, he could. In the afternoon, Clara arrived at the study with a thick folder. Here are the reports for Valleywood Construction plc, she said, placing it on the desk. Thomas opened the first one. Workplace accident report. Worker's name, David Adams. Thomas's heart stopped for a second. Date, 2 years ago. Cause, fall from scaffolding without adequate safety harness. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He continued reading. Internal investigation closed due to lack of evidence. No formal compensation. Thomas clenched his teeth. His company held a stake in that construction firm. He wasn't the principal owner, but he was part of it. He stood up abruptly. Richard called from the intercom. Come here now. Richard entered minutes later. Thomas tossed the document onto the desk. Did you know about this? Richard read quickly. Accidents happen in construction. Thomas looked at him incredulously. It's Lily's husband. Richard looked up, and Thomas slammed his hand on the desk. And we are investors in that company. Richard frowned. Minority shareholder. We don't manage operations, but we receive profits. The silence was thick. Richard spoke in a cold tone. You can't assume direct responsibility. Thomas looked at him fixedly. I'm not talking about legal responsibility. I'm talking about moral responsibility. Richard sighed. If you start reviewing every investment under that criterion, you'll dismantle half the portfolio. Thomas remained silent. Perhaps that was exactly what he should do. That night, as the house settled into its usual calm, Lily returned to the pantry. Not to hide, just to tidy. She paused in front of the full shelves. She remembered the previous night. She no longer felt the same shame, but a growing uneasiness. Thomas appeared at the doorway. She turned slowly. Mr. Thomas. He looked at her with a different intensity. I need to speak with you. Lily felt her heart race. Is it about this morning? Thomas shook his head. It's about your husband. Lily's world stopped. What about David? Thomas took a step towards her. I've been reviewing some documents. Lily felt a chill run through her body. What documents? Thomas swallowed. The construction company where he worked had a stake in my firm. The silence was absolute. Lily looked at him as if she didn't understand. What do you mean by that? Thomas held her gaze. That indirectly, I was involved. Lily's expression changed. Fear gave way to something deeper. Pain. And then slowly, contained rage. You knew? She asked, her voice broken. No, he replied firmly. But that doesn't exempt me. Lily took a step back. My husband died because he didn't have safety equipment. Thomas nodded. I know, and no one helped us. Thomas clenched his fists. I know that too. Tears began to roll down Lily's cheeks. And now what? She asked. Are you going to tell me you're sorry? Thomas felt the weight of guilt like a stone in his chest. I'm going to do something. Lily let out a bitter laugh. After 2 years? Thomas held her gaze, not looking away. Yes, even if it's late. Tension filled the pantry. Lily breathed with difficulty. My husband trusted that company, she whispered. He believed it was safe. Thomas closed his eyes for a second. I trusted my partners acted ethically, he admitted. Lily raised her chin. The difference is, you didn't lose anything. That sentence pierced him because she was right. But something was changing, and the past, which seemed buried, was beginning to demand answers. Lily wiped her tears with her uniform sleeve. I don't want your pity. Thomas took another step closer. I'm not offering you pity. I'm offering you justice. The word resonated again, but this time it wasn't just about wages. It was about truth. And truth meant confronting interests, partners, companies, contracts. And when truth begins to move, it shakes structures. And that structure was Thomas Harrison's empire. What neither of them yet knew was that Valleywood Construction plc was about to close a new multi-million-pound contract, and exposing irregularities could bring many down. The question was no longer whether Thomas was willing to help Lily. The question was how much he was willing to lose. And when a millionaire decides to confront his own system, war soon begins. The pantry fell silent after those words. Lily remained motionless, her eyes shining with contained rage, while Thomas held her gaze without looking away. For the first time, there was no hierarchy between them, just two people facing a truth that hurt too much. What exactly does that mean? Lily finally asked, her voice low but firm. That you were making money while my husband worked without safety? Thomas didn't respond immediately. The right words didn't exist, only the truth. It means I invested in a company I didn't oversee properly, he admitted, that I trusted reports without questioning them, and that I indirectly benefited from a system that failed. Lily swallowed. The weight of the years returned like a blow. Failed? She repeated almost in a whisper. It wasn't a failure, it was negligence. Thomas felt the impact of that word. Negligence. She took a step towards him, but not as a subordinate, as a widow. My husband didn't die from bad luck. He died because someone decided to cut corners on safety. The air grew heavy. Thomas took a deep breath. I know. No, you don't know, she retorted firmly. You didn't see him brought home wrapped in a sheet. You didn't hear my children ask why Daddy wouldn't wake up. Thomas lowered his gaze for a second, but then met it again. I didn't live it, he admitted, but that doesn't mean I can't take responsibility for what is mine now. Lily slowly shook her head. What's done is done. That phrase was like a sentence. The silence stretched for several seconds. Outside, the distant sound of a car entering the garage broke the tension. Thomas spoke in a lower voice. The internal investigation was closed without formal compensation. That shouldn't have happened. Lily looked at him in surprise. How do you know that? I read the reports. She felt the ground move beneath her feet. I was never able to access those documents. Thomas clenched his jaw. Because someone didn't want you to see them, the idea began to form in Lily's mind. For 2 years, she had accepted the official version, an unavoidable accident, bad luck, lack of evidence. But now, with the papers in the hand of a man who did have access to power, the story was starting to change. What exactly did you find? She asked. Thomas walked towards the pantry exit. Come with me. She hesitated for a second, but followed him to the study. Upon entering, she felt the contrast. Dark wood, tall bookshelves, framed diplomas, an office that exuded authority. Thomas closed the door, opened the folder on the desk, and turned it towards her. Lily approached with uncertain steps. Her hands trembled as she touched the paper. Workplace accident report. David Adams. Her eyes quickly scanned the lines. Lack of certified harness. Insufficient supervision. Incomplete maintenance record. Lily felt her breath catch. That's not what they told us, she whispered. Thomas shook his head. The investigation was closed as an isolated incident, but internal reports show multiple prior warnings about safety. Lily slowly looked up. Multiple? Thomas nodded. At least 3 previous reports highlighted risks in the scaffolding structure. Lily's hands began to tremble more forcefully. So they knew, she said almost soundlessly. Some did, and no one did anything. Thomas remained silent. That silence was answer enough. Lily felt a wave of rage surge through her chest. My husband died because someone decided not to spend money on new harnesses. Thomas closed his eyes for a second. It's possible. The word possible was like salt in a wound. Possible? She repeated incredulously. You have proof? Thomas looked at her seriously. I have indications. But to turn them into formal evidence, we need an external audit. Lily took a step back. Audit? Yes. And that involves exposing irregularities that could affect ongoing contracts. Lily immediately understood. And that would affect your company? Thomas didn't hesitate. Yes. She watched him in silence. Then why do it? Thomas looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Because the right thing isn't always the convenient thing. Lily felt something break inside her. For years, she had learned that the powerful always chose convenience. And your brother, she asked, didn't seem to agree? Thomas let out a slight exhale. Richard thinks in numbers. I did too for a long time. And now? Thomas looked at the document on the desk. Now I see a name, your husband's. Silence filled the room again. Lily sank into the chair opposite the desk. If you open that investigation, there will be consequences. Thomas nodded. For everyone, including you. Yes. Lily took a deep breath. I don't want you to lose your company because of me. Thomas shook his head. It wouldn't be because of you. It would be because of a truth that should have been faced years ago. Lily pressed her lips together. And if they can't prove anything? Thomas held her gaze. Then at least we will have tried to achieve justice. The word appeared again, but this time it carried a different weight. From the hallway, hurried footsteps were heard. The door opened without warning. Richard entered with a stern expression. What's going on here? His gaze went directly to Lily, sitting in front of the desk. Why is she in your office reviewing confidential documents? Thomas stood up. Because those documents talk about her husband. Richard frowned. This is madness. Lily tried to get up, but Thomas raised a hand. "Stay." Richard took a step forward. "You can't mix personal matters with strategic investments." Thomas responded with calm firmness. "They're not personal matters. They're ethical matters." Richard let out an ironic laugh. "Ethics don't pay salaries." Thomas looked at him with a determination Richard hadn't seen before. But a lack of ethics can destroy everything. Richard clenched his teeth. "If you open that audit, the major shareholders might withdraw." "Let them." The phrase dropped like a bomb. Richard fell silent. "Are you willing to risk millions for a housekeeper?" Thomas replied without hesitation. "I'm willing to risk millions for a life that was treated as disposable." Richard watched him for a long time, then spoke in a cold tone. "If you do this, you won't count on my support." Thomas held his gaze. "I understand." Richard left the study, slamming the door. The silence that remained was heavy. Lily looked at Thomas. "I don't want to be the reason for a fight between you." Thomas shook his head. "The fight isn't about you. It's about the way we've been managing things." Lily took a deep breath. "What are you going to do now?" Thomas picked up the phone. "Contact an independent auditor today." Lily felt a mixture of fear and hope. "That can take months." Thomas nodded. "But it will start today." She looked at him intensely. "If this goes wrong, you could lose a lot." Thomas looked at her with new serenity. "Perhaps I need to lose something to regain what matters." The words left her speechless. Hours later, while the auditor was contacted and the first movements began to take shape, the house seemed quiet on the outside, but inside, everything was shifting. Chloe burst into the study without knocking. "Daddy, can I show you something?" Thomas knelt to look her in the eye. "Of course, princess." She showed him a drawing. It was a large house with 3 figures outside. A girl, a woman in an apron, and a man. "That's us," she said, smiling. "Lily lives here too." Lily, who was in the doorway with a worried expression, felt her heart stop. Thomas looked at the drawing in silence. The image was simple but powerful. "Why did you draw Lily here?" he asked. Chloe looked at him as if the question were absurd. "Because she looks after us." The child's innocence made the message clear. Lily felt tears in her eyes. Thomas looked at the drawing with a decision forming within him. It wasn't just about legal justice. It was about family, but not everyone would view that decision favorably. That same afternoon, Richard received a call from one of the main shareholders of the construction company. "We've been informed that Harrison is requesting an external audit," said the voice on the other end. "Is that true?" Richard looked out of his office window. "Yes, it could cause regulatory problems." Richard remained silent. "If this goes ahead, there will be consequences for everyone," the shareholder warned. Richard clenched the phone. "I know." He hung up slowly. He knew that Thomas was crossing a line, and when someone powerful crosses a line, others try to stop them. That night, Lily returned to her small room, sat on the bed, looking at the bracelet with the initials S and M, her children. She thought about what was happening. She thought about David. She thought about the possibility that the truth would finally come to light. But she also thought about the danger, because exposing corruption in a large construction company was no game. It could bring retaliation, and Thomas was willing to face it. The question was she ready for what was to come? Because when the truth begins to break through, there is no turning back. The audit began faster than everyone expected. 2 days after that conversation in the pantry, an external team arrived at the central offices of Valleywood Construction plc in London. They didn't announce scandals, they didn't raise public suspicions. They arrived in discreet suits, closed briefcases, and a detailed list of requests. Maintenance records, safety contracts, internal reports prior to David Adams's accident. The news dropped like a stone into a calm lake. In the construction company's boardroom, the chief operating officer, Mark Stevens, looked at the documents with a frown. "Who authorized this?" he asked dryly. "Harrison," one of the lawyers replied. He demanded an immediate review. Mark clenched his jaw. That wasn't in the agreements. He's a minority shareholder. He has the right to request an extraordinary audit if there are indications of irregularities. Mark gently tapped the table with his fingers. "This could destroy us." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Lily tried to maintain the routine as if nothing out of the ordinary were happening. She prepared meals, tidied the rooms, helped Chloe with her homework, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time Thomas's phone rang, her heart raced. Every time she saw his tense expression as he left the study, she felt the past approaching like an inevitable storm. That afternoon, Thomas called her to the study again. She entered with the same nervousness as always, but now there was something more. Expectation. "Any news?" she asked in a low voice. Thomas looked at her seriously. Yes. The silence grew heavy. The auditors found something important. Lily felt her breath catch. What is it? Thomas turned his laptop screen towards her. Internal emails. Communications between supervisors weeks before the accident. Lily approached slowly, read a line that made her shiver. Replacing harnesses means delays and additional costs. Maintain current equipment until the next phase. The date was clear. 1 month before David's death. Lily brought a hand to her mouth. They knew, she whispered. Thomas nodded gravely. There were formal warnings about equipment wear and tear. They decided to postpone the investment. Lily's legs trembled. She sank into the chair. My husband died to save money. The phrase was almost inaudible, but strong enough to break something within the study. Thomas sat opposite her. This is no longer just negligence, it's a cover-up. Lily looked at him, her eyes filled with contained tears. What's going to happen now? Thomas took a deep breath. If the auditors confirm direct responsibility, the case can be reopened legally. She felt an internal shock. After 2 years? Yes, with new evidence, it's possible. Lily closed her eyes. For 2 years, she had forced herself to accept that it was an unavoidable accident. She repeated that version to herself to keep going, to avoid going mad with rage. And now, the truth was opening a wound that never closed. If this comes out, she said slowly, the company could close. Thomas held her gaze. It could lose contracts. It could face lawsuits. And you too. The silence returned. Lily lowered her gaze. I don't want to ruin your life. Thomas shook his head firmly. My life isn't ruined by facing the truth. It would be ruined if I ignored it. She observed him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Why are you really doing this? She asked. Thomas took a second before responding. Because that night in the pantry, I understood something. It wasn't just about hunger. It was about dignity. And if I close my eyes to this, I'll continue to be part of the same system that allowed your husband to die. Lily felt the tears finally escape. I just wanted someone to acknowledge that it wasn't his fault, she whispered. That it wasn't David's carelessness. Thomas nodded. It wasn't his fault. That affirmation, said with conviction, was like a painful balm, but the atmosphere was far from calming down. That same night, Richard entered the study with an alarmed expression. The shareholders are furious, he announced. Mark Stevens is threatening to sue you for reputational damage. Thomas didn't move. Let him. Richard looked at him incredulously. This could escalate to the media. Perhaps it should. Richard took a step forward. Are you willing to turn this into a national scandal? Thomas responded with calm firmness. If it means more workers won't die because of cutting corners on safety. Yes. Richard watched him for a long time. I've never seen you like this. Thomas briefly lowered his gaze. Neither have I. Lily, who was listening from the hallway without intending to, felt a mixture of dizziness and determination. The truth was coming out, but with each revelation, the risk increased. And somewhere in London, Mark Stevens made urgent calls, seeking allies, trying to stop the inevitable. Because when money is at stake, morality becomes a threat. And now the threat had a name, David Adams. The question was no longer whether there was negligence. The question was who else knew, and who would be willing to lie to protect everything. The pressure began to feel like a constant pulse in the Harrison household. It wasn't visible. There were no journalists at the door yet, no headlines, but Thomas's phone kept ringing, and each call brought the same warning disguised as advice. Think carefully, this could backfire on you. Too many interests are involved. But it was no longer just a business matter. It was David Adams's name on an official document. It was a decision that years ago had prioritized savings over a life. That morning, the auditors returned with a preliminary report much more forceful than Thomas expected. In the study, the atmosphere was dense. Lily was present, this time by Thomas's express decision, not as an employee, but as an affected party. The lead audit man, a man in a gray suit named Stephen Riley, opened his folder. We have identified multiple irregularities, he said with a technical but firm voice. Not only in the case of Mr. David Adams. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? Stephen placed several documents on the table. There were at least 4 previous accidents on the same site, all related to failures in safety equipment. None were officially reported to the Health and Safety Executive, HSE. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. 4? She whispered. Yes, Stephen replied, and in 2 of them, there were serious injuries. Thomas closed his eyes for a second. This was no longer an isolated tragedy. It was a pattern. Who authorized the decisions regarding the safety budget? Thomas asked. Stephen turned a page. The chief operating officer, Mark Stevens. But we also found emails where he mentions the need to maintain profitability margins demanded by the investors. Silence fell like a slab. Thomas understood what that implied. It wasn't just operational negligence, it was financial pressure. "Are you referring to us?" he asked, his voice controlled. Stephen held his gaze. "Your company was among the shareholders requesting increased quarterly returns." The air seemed to leave the study. Lily looked at Thomas. Not with hatred, but with devastation. Thomas felt an internal blow stronger than any before. "Are you saying that the pressure for profitability influenced the reduction of safety costs?" he asked. "It's highly probable," Stephen replied. The emails suggest it clearly. One of the documents was slid towards Lily. She took it with trembling hands. She read a highlighted phrase. "If we don't adjust operational expenses, investors will withdraw support." The date was 2 weeks before the accident. Lily felt the world tilt. Then, "It wasn't just the director," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was an entire system." Thomas couldn't meet her gaze this time because he understood something devastating. Even though he didn't sign any direct order, even though he wasn't present at the site, the system he helped build had created the pressure that ultimately killed David. The silence stretched for several seconds. "Legally," Stephen continued, "direct responsibility lies with operational management, but immediately and ethically, this can escalate." Thomas nodded slowly. "Recommendation: if you decide to proceed, you must be prepared for a legal battle, and for your name to appear in headlines alongside the case." Lily looked up. "Headlines?" Stephen looked at her with respect. "Yes, this is no longer just an internal audit." When the auditor left, the study fell silent. Thomas remained standing by the window, looking at the immaculate garden, which now seemed ironic. Lily remained seated, the document still in her hands. "You didn't know," she said finally, breaking the silence. Thomas didn't respond immediately. "I didn't know," he admitted. "But I was part of the machinery." Lily took a deep breath. "David trusted your company." That phrase was like a knife. Thomas closed his eyes. "I trusted that my partners acted ethically." Lily slowly stood up. "Are you going to go ahead?" Thomas turned to her. "Yes, even if they accuse me. Yes, even if I lose contracts. Yes." Lily observed him in long silence. Then, "This is no longer just for my husband." Thomas gently shook his head. "No, it's for all the workers who are still out there." At that instant the phone rang. Thomas looked at the screen. "Mark Stevens," he answered. "Harrison," Mark said with a tense voice. "We need to talk. I'm listening." "You're taking this too far." Thomas didn't respond. "The audit has already reached the health and safety executive," Mark continued. "Do you know what that means?" "It means the truth is coming out," Thomas replied with calm firmness. Mark let out a bitter laugh. "The truth doesn't pay multi-million-pound compensations." Thomas gripped the phone. Lies cost lives. There was a heavy silence on the other end. "If you go ahead, I'll drag you down with me," Mark warned. "You won't come out clean from this." Thomas looked at Lily. "I'm not looking to come out clean. I'm looking for the truth to come out." He hung up. Lily felt the weight of the threat. "He's not just an annoyed businessman," she said. "He's someone with power." Thomas nodded. "And power gets uncomfortable when it feels exposed." That night, the first news appeared on a digital portal. Valleywood Construction plc, under investigation for possible irregularities in workplace safety. David Adams's name appeared in the article. Lily read it from her small room. Her hands trembled. For the first time, her husband's name was not accompanied by the word accident. It was accompanied by the word investigation. Tears rolled down her face. They were not just of pain, they were of vindication. Upstairs, Richard paced back and forth in his office. "This is a disaster," he murmured. Thomas entered without knocking. "It's not a disaster, it's a consequence." Richard looked at him with frustration. "Shareholders are withdrawing capital preventively. Let them. You could lose millions." Thomas approached. "If those millions are built on silences like this, then they're worth nothing." Richard observed him in silence. "I never thought you'd say that." Thomas took a deep breath. "Neither did I." Downstairs, in the dining room, Chloe was drawing again. Lily sat next to her. "Why are you crying?" the girl asked innocently. Lily smiled weakly. "Because sometimes sad things start to get a little bit better." Chloe tilted her head. "Is it because of your husband?" Lily nodded. "Yes." The girl took her hand. "My daddy said he's going to do the right thing." Lily looked towards the study. She knew that decision could destroy many things, but she also knew there was no turning back. That same dawn, a new report arrived in Thomas's email. The auditor had found something else, an internal document marked as confidential, a memorandum where Mark Stevens warned that if external audits reviewed safety conditions, shared responsibility could arise with investors who pressed for profitability margins. Thomas felt a dull blow. Shared responsibility. That included him, and this time, not as a spectator, but as an actor. He looked at the document for a long time. He knew that if he made it public, the impact would be devastating for the construction company, for his firm, for his reputation, but he also knew that hiding it would turn him into exactly what he always criticized. Lily gently knocked on the study door. "May I come in?" Thomas nodded. She entered and noticed the grave expression on his face. "What's wrong?" Thomas turned the screen towards her. "This." Lily read the memorandum slowly. When she finished, she looked up. "So you were implicated?" Thomas nodded with brutal honesty. "Indirectly, but yes." The silence stretched eternally. Lily took a deep breath. "What are you going to do?" Thomas looked at her fixedly. "Own it." The word fell like a definitive declaration. Lily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet because that decision would change everything. Not only her story, but that of a man who was willing to confront his own empire. And when a millionaire decides to demolish the structures that sustain him, the world trembles. But the truth finally begins to breathe. The news exploded like thunder at dawn. Shareholder acknowledges financial pressure linked to reduction of safety measures at Valleywood Construction plc. Thomas Harrison's name appeared in national headlines. Some called him brave, others called him reckless, some accused him directly of hypocrisy. But what no one knew was that this public confession had not been easy. The previous night in the study, Thomas had sat for hours in front of a camera, a recorded message, without advisors, without lawyers, correcting phrases, just him and the truth. "My name is Thomas Harrison." He had begun with a firm but sincere voice. "For years, I was part of a system that prioritized profitability over safety. Although I did not sign any direct order, I recognized that the financial pressure generated by investors contributed to decisions that ultimately cost lives. Among them, that of David Adams. Upon pronouncing that name publicly, something changed within him. It was no longer a piece of data in a report. It was a man, a husband, a father. The broadcast went viral within hours. At the mansion, the atmosphere was charged. Richard paced with the phone glued to his ear. "We're losing contracts," he murmured tensely. 3 have already cancelled. Thomas listened without reacting. "Do you realize what you've done?" Richard finally exclaimed. "You admitted responsibility to the entire country." Thomas looked at him with serenity. "Moral responsibility. That's enough for lawyers to build lawsuits. Then let them build them." Richard looked at him incredulously. "You could lose everything we built." Thomas took a deep breath. "If what we built rests on unjust silences, then perhaps it deserves to fall." The silence between the brothers was long. "I don't recognize you," Richard murmured. Thomas lowered his gaze for an instant. "I didn't recognize myself before either." In the kitchen, Lily watched the repeated broadcast on the small television used by the staff. She heard her own name mentioned. Lily Adams, widow of the deceased worker. Her hands trembled. She never imagined that David's story would come out of the shadows. She never imagined that the most powerful man in the house would stand before cameras and say his name with respect. Chloe ran in. "Lily, Daddy's on TV!" Lily smiled weakly. "I know, my love." The girl looked at the screen. "He's telling the truth, isn't he?" Lily nodded. "Yes, he's telling the truth. But the truth doesn't just bring relief, it brings consequences." That same afternoon, Mark Stevens convened a press conference. With a firm gesture, he denied direct responsibility and announced that the construction company would take legal action against Thomas for damaging and unsubstantiated statements. The conflict was no longer private, it was public, and when power is exposed, it reacts. At the mansion, a dark car parked in front of the main gate. A man in a suit got out with a folder in his hand, a process server. Richard received the document with a pale face. "Lawsuit for damages," he announced dryly. "I told you so." Thomas took the envelope without trembling. Lily watched from a distance, her heart aching. "I don't want this to ruin your life," she whispered when they were alone. Thomas looked at her with unexpected calm. "My life was already ruined. I just didn't know it." She frowned. "You had success, money, a solid company." Thomas gently shook his head. And I was empty. Lily remained silent. The night I saw you in the pantry, he continued, I understood something. It wasn't just your hunger. It was my indifference. Lily felt the words pierce her chest. I didn't want you to feel guilty, she said. Thomas looked at her fixedly. I don't feel guilty for feeling compassion. I feel responsible for not having felt it sooner. The phone rang again. This time it was a national channel, requesting a live interview. Thomas accepted. Richard looked at him in despair. Are you going to keep exposing yourself? Thomas nodded. Yes. Hours later, in a London TV studio, Thomas sat opposite the journalist. Mr. Harrison, she began, why take responsibility when legally you could avoid it? Thomas held her gaze. Because legality doesn't always coincide with justice. Are you prepared to face financial consequences? Yes. And personal ones? Thomas took a deep breath. I'm already facing the consequence of having lived too long without questioning my decisions. The interview concluded with a phrase that became a trend. It's not about losing money. It's about regaining humanity. Meanwhile, in Coventry, Lily's mother watched television with tears in her eyes. Daughter, she whispered into the phone when Lily called. For the first time, someone is acknowledging that David wasn't to blame. Lily cried in silence. Yes, Mum, finally. But the pressure continued to mount. Shareholders began to withdraw capital. Thomas's company's shares fell on the stock market. Richard confronted him again. This is a free fall. Thomas looked at the figures on the screen. Perhaps we needed to fall to rise differently. Richard was speechless. That night, Thomas went up to Chloe's room. The girl was awake. Daddy, are you sad? Thomas sat beside her. A little. Because they're telling you off on TV? Thomas smiled softly. Not exactly. Then why? Thomas took her small hand. Because doing the right thing sometimes hurts. Chloe looked at him with childish seriousness. But you always tell me to tell the truth. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. And that's what I'm doing. The girl hugged him. Then I'm proud of you. That sentence was more powerful than any lost contract. Downstairs in the staff quarters, Lily sat on her bed, the thread bracelet between her fingers. She thought of David. She thought of how he always told her that the important thing was to live with dignity. She thought of Thomas facing the world and understood something. This was no longer just justice for her husband. It was transformation. In the study, Thomas signed documents with determination, internal restructuring, creation of a permanent workplace safety fund for all linked companies, mandatory external supervision. Richard watched him in silence. Are you really going to change the entire model? Thomas nodded. Yes, that will reduce profits. Then we will reduce profits. Richard sighed deeply. I never thought I'd have to choose principles over profits. Thomas looked up. I never thought I'd understand that. Without principles, profits mean nothing. Outside, the press began to divide opinions. Some businessmen criticized his stance. Others began to review their own practices. The wave could no longer be stopped, and amidst that storm, Lily stopped feeling invisible, not because of fame, but because David's life was being recognized as valuable. That night, Thomas walked to the pantry, stopped at the door, remembered the first scene, the woman sitting on the floor, the plate of leftovers, the shame, and understood that that image was the beginning of everything. Lily appeared behind him. Are you thinking about that night? She asked softly. Thomas nodded. Yes, I am. Me too. They looked at each other in silence. Thank you, Lily finally said. Thomas gently shook his head. Don't thank me for doing what I should have done from the beginning. Lily took a deep breath. Still, thank you. The silence was no longer tense. It was human. The legal battle had just begun. The financial losses were real, but something bigger was happening. A man was ceasing to be just a millionaire. He was learning to be fair. And when justice becomes a decision, power changes its meaning. But what neither of them yet knew was that the greatest test would not be the economic downfall. It would be the threat that was about to arrive from those unwilling to let the truth continue to advance. The threat arrived a week after the national interview. It wasn't public, it wasn't legal, it was silent. An unmarked envelope appeared in Thomas's office. Inside, a single sheet printed with cold letters. Withdraw now, or lose more than money. Thomas held the paper for a long time without saying anything. He wasn't naive. He knew that touching large interests always brought consequences. But seeing the threat written, concrete, directed, was different. Richard was the first to speak when he read the message. This is no longer just reputation, he said in a low voice. It's dangerous, Thomas nodded. I know. You could stop here, Richard insisted. You've done enough. You admitted errors. You created the safety fund. You don't have to destroy yourself completely. Thomas looked out of the study window. The garden remained immaculate. The outside world seemed calm. If I stop now, I teach them that intimidation works. Richard remained silent. Downstairs in the kitchen, Lily felt a strange uneasiness. She had learned to read the changes in the house's energy. That morning the air was tense. Thomas came downstairs with the envelope in his hand. I need to talk to you, he said softly. Lily stopped what she was doing. They sat in the dining room, the same place where everything began to transform. Thomas placed the paper on the table. Lily read it slowly. Her face paled. This is because of me, she whispered. Thomas shook his head. It's because of what we're doing. Lily clasped her hands. I don't want anything to happen to you or your daughter because of this. Thomas looked at her firmly. Chloe will not grow up in a world where her father backs down out of fear. Lily felt a lump in her chest. But there are powerful people behind this. I know. The silence was long. Are you going to report the threat? She asked. Yes. And he did. He presented the letter to the authorities and made it public. The gesture generated even more media impact. Some called him reckless. Others began to openly support him. Several labor organizations offered backing, and something unexpected happened. Other workers started to speak. Anonymous emails arrived at the Health and Safety Executive, HSE. Testimonies from workers confirmed similar pressures on other sites. The story ceased to be just David Adams's. It became a symbol. Meanwhile, Thomas's company's financial situation weakened. Shares falling, contracts suspended. Richard faced constant calls from furious investors. One night, exhausted, Richard entered the study without announcement. We're on the verge of collapse, he said, his voice broken. Thomas looked up. How much? Richard took a deep breath. If this continues, we'll have to sell part of the group. The silence was heavy. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. His entire life he had worked to expand that empire. Now he was willing to see it shrink. Do it, he finally said. Richard looked at him in surprise. Really? Yes. Doesn't it hurt? Thomas thought for a few seconds. It would hurt more to look Lily in the eyes and know I backed down. Richard lowered his gaze. I don't know if I'm as strong as you. Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. It's not about strength. It's about choosing what kind of man you want to be. Meanwhile, in Coventry, Scarlett and Max watched television with their grandmother. Mummy's on the news again, Scarlett said. The grandmother smiled with contained pride. Your daddy would be proud. In London, an unexpected call changed the course of everything. It was the Health and Safety Executive. Mr. Harrison, we have enough evidence to open criminal proceedings against Mark Stevens and several operational managers. Thomas closed his eyes. Does that include reviewing shared responsibility of investors? There was a brief silence on the other end. Yes. Thomas knew what that implied. His name would remain linked to the case, but it also meant something bigger. Real justice. When he hung up, he looked for Lily. He found her in the garden helping Chloe plant flowers. Lily? He called softly. She stood up. Did something happen? Thomas nodded. The case is formally reopened. There will be criminal proceedings. Lily stood motionless. Her hands began to tremble. Really? Yes. Lily brought a hand to her chest. 2 years of silence. 2 years of accepting a version that always seemed incomplete to her. Now, finally, justice was moving. Tears began to roll down her face. Thomas said nothing, just stood there. Chloe looked at the scene, confused. Why are you crying? Lily knelt in front of the girl. Because sometimes, my love, pain takes a long time to find an answer. But when it comes, it heals a little. Chloe hugged her. That image was etched in Thomas's memory. A woman who had gone hungry in his pantry was now hugging his daughter while justice began to act. Weeks later, Mark Stevens was formally summoned. The internal documents came to light. The financial pressure was exposed. Shared responsibility was recognized in the file. Thomas publicly accepted his moral and economic part. He paid direct compensation to Lily's family, beyond any judicial obligation, but he did it in private, without cameras, without press. One day he called Lily to the study. On the desk were legal documents and a small box. The official compensation will arrive through legal process, he said. This is separate. Lily opened the box. Inside, there was a property contract, an apartment in London, in her and her children's names. Lily looked at him, speechless. It's not charity, Thomas clarified. It's restitution. And it's also a way to ensure Scarlett and Max can live with you. Lily broke down in tears. I don't know how to thank you for this. Thomas gently shook his head. Don't thank me. I'm rebuilding something too. And it was true, because while the financial empire was shrinking, his personal life was rebuilding. He spent more time with Chloe, listened more, observed more. One Sunday, months later, the mansion was no longer the same. They had sold part of the business group. The pace was calmer. Lily no longer lived in the staff quarters. Her children had arrived in London. Scarlett played in the garden with Chloe. Max ran after a football. Thomas watched the scene from the terrace. Richard approached. We lost a lot, he said. Thomas nodded. Yes, but you also gained something. Thomas looked down, where Lily laughed with the children. Yes, Richard sighed. I didn't think this end was possible. Thomas smiled slightly. Neither did I. That afternoon, as the sun set over London, Lily approached Thomas. Scarlett wants to tell you something, she said. The girl shyly approached. Thank you for helping my mum. Thomas knelt to be at her height. Thank you for trusting me. The girl smiled, and at that instant, Thomas understood something with absolute clarity. Money builds walls, but empathy builds bridges. That night, when everyone went to sleep, Thomas returned to the pantry. He stood at the door, remembering the image that changed his life. A woman hiding to eat leftovers. A small scene, an almost invisible moment, but enough to bring down an entire system within him. He took a deep breath and understood the final lesson. Sometimes we don't need to see a great tragedy to change. Sometimes it's enough to look directly at those we always ignored, because true power is not in how much you have, it's in how much you are willing to transform when you discover you were wrong. And true wealth is not measured in figures. It is measured in the ability to recognize mistakes, assume responsibilities, and choose humanity over fear. If this story leaves anything in your heart, let it be this. Never underestimate the impact of a small act of conscience, because a decision made in silence can change entire destinies. And sometimes, the greatest change begins when we stop looking up and start looking into the eyes of those who have always been right in front of us.